Hi, welcome to Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura, and today's video is part of a series I do where I compare books with their movie adaptations. And through these videos, I discuss why the majority of the time, when it comes to the book versus movie, the book wins. Now, having said that, I enjoy watching movies just as much as I enjoy reading books. Like, I love both. So I do give unbiased reviews of both book and movie, I think, for the most part. I also wanted to let you know that this is available as a podcast. And so these tend to be about 30 minutes long, but especially for ones that go over that, if it just works better for you to listen to it as a podcast, they are available. So just search Why the Book Wins in whatever podcasting platform you use. I will also link to them down below for Spotify and Google Podcast. For Spotify and Apple Podcasts, because those are the ones most people use. So yeah, if you would rather do that, those are available too. And before we get into this video, I do want to say that there will be spoilers for both the book and the movie. So if you plan on reading the book or watching the movie and do not want it spoiled, then go do that first and then come back and watch this video. And I guess that about wraps it up as far as intro stuff. Aside from, I would love it if you subscribe to my channel if you love book-related content, and I share my book collection of vintage books and special edition books like Easton Press and Folio Society and all that stuff. So if you're into books or movies, but definitely my channel leans more towards books, but I might get more into movies as time goes on, but for now I'm leaning more towards books. Anyway, if that interests you, you should definitely subscribe to my channel. And yeah, without further ado, let's get right into today's video. Hi, welcome back to Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura, and today we are talking about The Snowman, which was written by Jo Nesbo, released in 2007, and then the movie by the same name was released in 2017 and was directed by Thomas Alfredson. And this episode is kind of in honor of my mom, because growing up, she was very good about making the house very festive. And not only decorating for the holidays, but also decorating for the seasons, and even specific months had different themes for the decorations. And so Christmas, of course, December was, of course, all about Christmas. However, we had no snowman decorations in Christmas because the snowman decorations were reserved only for January. So January was the snowman month. And so in honor of my mom, because all these years later, I still associate snowman with January, I wanted to cover the snowman while we were still in January. Having said that, that's about where the connection with my mom ends as far as this episode goes, because this is a book and movie she would not be into. My thoughts on the book and kind of the plot of the book. This is a detective story where we follow Detective Harry Hull, and Jo Nesbo has a series of books following Harry Hull. And it's written in the noir detective film, or noir, writing style, I believe. That style just really isn't for me. Nightmare Alley was noir, but it wasn't a detective novel, and I love Nightmare Alley. However, I've read two different noir style books that were detective novels, and both of them just weren't my style. And the first one I read was called Finch, which was like a sci-fi detective story. And that one, my complaints about it, I realized maybe are just things that are common within noir detective stories. For example, it was just a bit overdramatic and over the top a lot of the time, and some of the dialogue was just kind of cheesy. And reading The Snowman, that was common in The Snowman as well. So maybe that's just a common detective noir thing to do. And so I have a lot of negative to say about the book, but just keep in mind that it just wasn't a style that fit my personal liking. So just because I didn't love it and I'm saying negative things about it, plenty of people do love it. And maybe you'll end up liking it too. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't read it just because I didn't like it. Having said that, yeah, the dialogue, there was a lot of cheesy dialogue. And I'll give you an example. There's one part that reads, "What's going on?" Holmes asked. "I honestly can't get my head around this." "Try," Harry said. "Forget everything you thought you knew and try." Which, yeah, that's just so cheesy. And then also in Finch, like the detective Finch, there's a part where he gets tortured and it's just kind of over the top. And Snowman does the same thing, where some scenes, as far as being gruesome or something, it just seems like it's over the top. And then Harry Hull himself also does, go through some painful things near the end as he saves people. And so maybe that's also just a common thing, is to have the protagonist like pushed to the edge physically and mentally and emotionally by the end, you know, and yet they still saved the day. So yeah, that too just was too over the top for my taste. And then, not to talk about Finch too much, because this is supposed to be about the Snowman, but there was another thing that I could not help but think about Finch, is that in the Snowman, Harry's apartment is like being not fumigated, but he has fungus in his apartment, and so there's someone there dealing with this fungus that is growing in his apartment. And then at one point he is talking to Raquel, I believe, his ex-girlfriend, and he says to her, "Apparently it's eating me up. Brain, eyes, lungs, concentration, sucking out colors and memory. The fungus is growing. I'm disappearing. It's becoming me. I'm becoming it." And he's like, you know, not being serious when he says this to her. However, I couldn't help but think of Finch, because Finch takes place in a world where, you know, mushrooms are a big part and people are literally overtaken by mushrooms and fungus. So I thought that was quite the similarity. And I'm jumping ahead here, but as far as the fungus in his apartment, in the movie, I believe they show that Mathias was like part of that and he was using that to learn more about Harry, I think. Whereas in the book, I don't remember. I think Mathias was behind the fungus thing, and so it wasn't legit. It was just his way to learn what was going on in Harry's apartment, I think. And the movie for sure shows that. And the book, I think it does. But moving on from fungus, back to the book review. Another thing I didn't love about this book is that it takes Harry forever to finally realize who the killer is. Like, he accuses, like, literally everybody else before finally narrowing it down to basically the only person left. And then the book also just kind of dragged for me. Like, I don't know. I wasn't bored the entire time, but there were definitely times where it's just like, okay, let's wrap this up. And I suspected who the killer was, but Harry just keeps chasing one red herring after the other. And so it got old, you know, after the fourth accusation, which ends up not being true. It's like, okay, seriously, can we just wrap this up already? Another complaint is that I feel like women just weren't portrayed in a good light in this book. Like, literally every female character cheats on her significant other. Men are also constantly sexualizing the woman, and I get when it's like, you know, a seedy cop or a character we're not supposed to like, they're gonna be thinking these thoughts about women, and you just kind of expect it because they're, you know, that's just how they are. But then, like, the people you're supposed to like do it too, and so it's literally just coming from everybody, and it was just too much. Did not like that. And then more specifically, there's a scene where Harry is reflecting back to when he and Raquel were dating and living together, and he's thinking back on how, like, he would always be coming home late, and he would come in the bedroom and she would be upset and annoyed at him, but then they would have sex and then all would be forgiven and she was fine. Which, just ugh. And then yet another specific scene is when he and Katrine, the other police officer, are at like a bar social function, and Katrine hits on him and then he rejects her. And then the next day he notices that she has kind of softened up towards him. And the book reads, "Paradoxically, the episode at Fenris Bar had made her more relaxed with him. Perhaps that was the thing about attractive women. A rejection demanded their respect, made them trust you more." Which again, like, yeah, did not like that either. Like, Nesbo must just think of women as being very promiscuous and being liars. And also, like, you can treat them however you want, like in the case with Raquel, and as long as you're just like good in bed, that's all they need, and everything else will be forgiven. And then with the Katrine incident, like, just treat them poorly and, you know, treat a woman poorly, and that's how you get her to respect you. Which, so yeah, just a lot of bad messages, I think, in this, and maybe some of them aren't as blatant and more subconscious or subtle, but that doesn't make them any better. Like, it's still, yeah. And I read another reviewer that had the same complaint, so I'm not the only one out there who thought this. So yeah, not a fan of how the women were portrayed. And thankfully, you know, one good thing about the movie is it doesn't portray women in this negative light as much as the book did, at least. So that's one thing. And, you know, as far as the good, I did enjoy all the detail we got, for the most part. Like, it is a very detail-oriented book. And there were some suspenseful moments where I was on the edge of my seat. However, that really didn't happen as often as I would have wanted when reading a thriller. And then as far as the twists and turns, there was like one reveal that I was surprised by. But the others weren't that surprising, and so it wasn't like this shocking twist and turn or something. It was just like, okay, now we're going with this, and now we're going with that, and it wasn't as exciting as I would have liked. And also, like, As the reader, I guessed early on that it was Mathias the whole time, and yet it took Harry forever to figure it out. And I don't know, like as the reader, maybe it's easier to see that, whereas if you think of yourself in Harry Hull's position, you know, he's not going to automatically think that the killer is his ex-wife's boyfriend, right? That's a pretty extreme thought to have. And so I get, like, as, you know, as his character, he wouldn't jump to that conclusion, of course. But I don't know. As a reader, also, like, I don't want to guess who the person is so early on. Like, I want to be intrigued and be guessing and be kept on my toes. Whereas I felt like early on, I was like, it's him, it's Mathias. And then throughout the story, nothing made me question that belief. And so the whole time I was just waiting for Harry Hull to figure it out. And then onto the movie. So even though I did not enjoy this book, and I've heard negative things about the movie, you know, I had to watch it anyway because that is the job I have given myself. And yeah, and I don't want to, like, I didn't go into this episode thinking that I would just hate them. I had low expectations for the movie because I'd heard bad things about the movie, but the book has really good reviews, and so I expected to really enjoy the book. So I don't want to sound just like super negative about everything, and I don't want you thinking I went into this episode knowing it would be more focused on negative thoughts about it, but that's just kind of what happened. But with the book, I had expected to really like it, but then I just didn't. So anyway, and with the movie, I also love Michael Fassbender, so going into the movie, I was like, you know, even though I haven't heard great things about the movie, at least I'll still get a great performance out of Fassbender, right? Because he's always amazing. And before watching the movie, I did read that there were like 15 pages worth of script, I believe, that didn't even get filmed. And they just had budgeting issues, apparently, I believe is what I read. And so that kind of explains a lot of the problems with the plot. And so going into the movie, I did have that in my mind as a way to, you know, be more forgiving to the movie, knowing that this is not what the director had in mind and that it just did not, you know, the end product was not what he had intended. Nonetheless, as much as I did not like the book, it was definitely far better than the movie, even when you take into account scenes that weren't filmed or whatever. It was not a good movie, as we will get into. Also, full disclosure, I watched this movie on my laptop, and so I had a Word document open on the side that I put my notes in. And anytime I knew there would be like a gruesome scene, I put the Word document over the screen because I didn't want to see it. So I watched the movie, but there were a fair amount of times where I had the screen covered. You know, scary stuff just isn't my thing. And this book, I was expecting a detective novel. I didn't expect it like to be graphic. And so, yeah, so I guess just letting you know that I watched the movie, but there was a lot of it, maybe not a lot, but there were several scenes that I had the screen covered for. So I know some of the deaths were different, I believe, but I wasn't watching, so I won't be getting into the details as far as that goes. But onto the acting. So Michael Fassbender, I love him. I talked about him for my coverage on 12 Years a Slave, Jane Eyre, and I think that's it. So this is only the third movie I've talked about that has him, but he's incredible. He's one of my favorite actors. And he is perfectly cast as Harry Hull. Like, as I was reading this book, it just made so much sense that Fassbender played Harry because, yeah, he just plays that character so well, and I could just see it. And it would be cool to see him in another movie where he plays a character like this, but in a movie that has a better script. Also, in the book and movie, Harry is an alcoholic, but it didn't feel real, you know? Like, it felt like Nesbo was just coming up with the idea of this character, and he was like, what can I add to make Harry even more complicated and layered? Ooh, I know, let's make him an alcoholic. And he added that in. And so it seems like it's more just for entertainment or to add, you know, another layer to Harry's character without making it very accurate or real. For one, in the book, Harry keeps a bottle of Jim Beam stashed in his apartment in case he decides to drink again. And I get alcoholism isn't the same for everybody, but what newly sober alcoholic can keep a bottle of hard alcohol in their house and be able to resist it until like they're ready or something? Like, as far as I know, alcoholics would not be able to resist that, especially when they're first getting sober. I don't know. That's just my take on that. But we have Rebecca Ferguson as Katrine Bratt, and she is well cast. I thought she was good in this. Charlotte Gainsbourg plays Raquel, Harry's ex-girlfriend, and again, like I said, I didn't or I think I said this, I didn't have a problem with any of the acting in this movie. It was really just like things with the script and stuff. And so as far as the acting goes, I thought everybody was fine, and I had no complaints really with the acting. But Jonas Carlson plays Mathias, and yeah, he was fine. J.K. Simmons is in the role of Arve Stop, and this one, he did not look the way Arve is described in the book. And also, a lot of things with his character just aren't resolved due to the fact that they had scenes they weren't able to film. So we never really like learn what his deal is. And there's a lot of scenes from book to movie that just weren't in the movie because he was a bigger role in the book. But we'll be getting to that in a little bit. And last but not least, we have Val Kilmer, who plays Gert Rafto. And so he was recovering from some kind of throat or tongue surgery or something, and he couldn't speak. And so his lines were dubbed over. Which, especially the first scene with him, it's like so obvious that his lines are dubbed. And if he wasn't able to speak, then why was he even cast in this? Like, sort of just cast someone who would be able to say their lines. And also, the character of Gert Rafto is just kind of weird in the movie. Like, in the book, he was kind of like the rogue detective in a way. And he was an alcoholic as well, which the movie shows. But he was just, I don't know, his scenes just seemed weird to me, I guess. And maybe part of it was just Val Kilmer looked weird and then his voice is dubbed over. But I don't know, I wasn't really feeling that character. So to talk about Rafto and Katrine, who is his daughter, that was the reveal that I was most surprised by in the book that I wasn't expecting, is that, you know, Katrine was Rafto's daughter. And so to talk about Rafto so the book takes place in 2007. And then I believe it's like in the 90s, sometime in the like 10 years prior or something, maybe more than 10 years. Anyway, in the 90s, Rafto was a big time detective up in Bergen. And this book takes place in Oslo. But he was in Bergen and he was in charge of like some kind of murder case. He ended up disappearing. And so the murders got pinned on him. And so Katrine, all her life, like she knew it wasn't her dad. And so she becomes a cop and she wants to not only clear her father's name, but also like find the murderer because she suspects he's dead, even though his body was never found. And this is different from the movie because in the movie, the killer makes it seem like Rafto committed suicide, so his body is found. And so she's not clearing his name because the murders were never pinned on him. She's just trying to find out who his killer was because she doesn't believe that he committed suicide. And so yeah, Katrine hears about, I guess she knew from her research that Mathias had moved. Well, she didn't know it was Mathias, but she knew the Snowman had moved to Oslo. And so she goes to Oslo and she has heard of Harry Hole because he's a famous detective. And so she writes him a note pretending she is the Snowman because she knows the Snowman will kill sometime soon based on her research. And so she gives Harry Hole a note acting like it's from the Snowman to pique Harry's interest and to rope him in into figuring out this case. And then when she shows up at the police force or police, building, she tells Harry like, oh, the boss told you to, I'm just going along with whatever you're in charge of kind of a thing. And the boss hadn't told her that, but she's saying that obviously because she wants to be working with Harry and direct him in the right path so that he can help her figure out who the Snowman is. And yeah, that was different from the movie because in the movie, the Snowman really does send Harry the note. Whereas, yeah, in the book, Katrine wrote the note. It wasn't even the Snowman. And then with Arve Stop, so in both book and movie, at one point, Katrine believes that, as well as Harry, I think too, they believe that Arve Stop is the Snowman. And so Katrine, like in both book and movie, seduces him. And then in the movie, she goes up to the hotel room to wait for him to show up. And while she's waiting, the Snowman ends up killing her. Whereas in the book, she and Arve Stop do meet up at his apartment. And she ends up like kind of torturing him because she believes he's the Snowman. So she's trying to get him to confess. However, he's not confessing. And she realizes like, I guess I was wrong. He isn't the Snowman. And then she hears Harry and the police driving up and she doesn't want to be found. And so she jumps out the window and escapes. And after this, Harry is led to believe that Katrine is the Snowman and that she like killed her own father along with these women. And then, yeah, with Rafto, as I said, he disappeared in the 90s. And then in the book, Katrine and Harry go to Bergen, which is where she grew up with her dad, Rafto. Well, her parents divorced. But anyway, and so she goes along with him to investigate this and look into Rafto because they see that he was trying to solve these crimes back in the 90s when they were happening. And so they go search his cabin, and then while there in the freezer, they find his body. Like I said, in the movie, this wasn't a thing because he didn't just disappear. They believed he committed suicide. And then on to Vetlesen, the doctor. And so in the book and movie, we have this character in both. But in the book, we learn more. I don't remember if this is in the movie actually, but in the book, all of the children of the woman were being taken to him for their doctor appointments. And so that's why originally they think Vetlesen is the snowman, is because he has this connection with the family because he's their doctor or whatever. But we find out, like, long story short, Arve Stop is the father of these children. And so he's the father, but these women were with other men. And so these other men think they're the father when really it's Arve Stop. And Arve Stop has some genetic disease that is very rare. And he is worried about these illegitimate children getting that disease. And so he knows Vetlesen is very discreet and can keep a secret. And so he pays him to research this disease and to give these children checkups to monitor this genetic disease that they have from him. And yeah, at one point, Harry Hole thinks that Vetlesen is the snowman. However, they end up finding Vetlesen and that he has committed suicide by injecting himself with some medication or poison or something. And so they're like, oh, like he was the snowman. And then he killed himself because we were getting too close to him and he knew we were going to discover him. Of course, it's realized that he was murdered and that he wasn't the snowman. And so Harry has to, move on to the next person. And then he accuses whoever else is next in line to be accused. And in the movie, Vetlesen is made to look like he commits suicide as well, but Katrine and Harry do not believe it, just like she doesn't believe that her dad did either. And this scene is kind of weird in the movie. Like, Harry goes to her house and she's, like super stressed out and emotional, and like she starts like trying to fight him. And so then he like is holding her and he won't let go, and I don't know. It was kind of a weird scene in my opinion. I didn't love it. But also another thing from the book is that Vetlesen and Mathias were friends from medical school. And so Mathias will feed Harry information because Harry knows that they had known each other. And so Mathias does a good way about, pushing Harry in that direction by feeding him false information mixed in with some truth as well. So on to Mathias. When he was a child, like 10 or something, his mom drove him to some house and she was like, stay in the car, I'll be back in 10 minutes. And she goes inside. She ends up being in there for a while, and so he gets bored, he gets out of the car, he builds a snowman, and then he climbs on top of the snowman to, I think he was trying purposefully to see through the window. And when he looks through the window, he sees his mom having sex with another man, and the man does not have nipples, and Mathias also doesn't have nipples, and he knows it's a genetic disease. And because he and this man have that in common, he realizes that this man must be his father and that his real father isn't his father. He gets back in the car, and when his mom eventually comes back as they're driving, Mathias causes the car to crash and they go into a lake and he escapes, but his mom dies. And so this event is obviously a big event in his life and he is scarred from it. And he was kind of weird and had a personality disorder to begin with. And then this event just kind of escalates things and makes him more weird and violent, apparently. And so because his mom lied about who his real father was, as an adult, he seeks out other women who have done the same. And then he kind of recreates the scenario in a way because he builds a snowman each time, hence the reason he is called the Snowman. This was changed in the movie though, because in the movie, he and his mom lived alone, and this guy who he called his uncle would come visit. And then he finds out, and the uncle is abusive to the mom and to Mathias. And he finds out that this uncle actually isn't his uncle and it's his dad. And so then he finds this out, and then the dad drives off, and the dad had also been a cop for, I don't know if that pertains to anything, but anyway, the dad drives off and the mom follows with Mathias in the car for some reason. And then they end up getting skidding on the ice, and then the ice breaks and Mathias escapes, and he's telling his mom what are you doing? Get out of the car. But she doesn't want to escape and she ends up falling into the ice. So very different from the book as far as that goes, because the book made, obviously Mathias caused the car to crash when he was a kid, whereas in the movie, he didn't want his mom to die. And in the movie, Mathias doesn't have the genetic disease, but this was a big part of the book because the genetic disease, some of the other symptoms were that as he got older, basically he was going to end up dying a slow, painful death because of this disease. And so he had known from a young age that when the pain started happening, he was going to just kill himself. That way he didn't have to have a painful death. And Harry Hole knows this because at one point Mathias tells him this. And so because Harry Hole knows this, when they have their showdown, Harry purposefully does not kill him and instead arrests him and makes sure he stays alive. And one section of this book I did like is when Harry, after all this event has happened, Harry is talking to like a former police officer, detective or someone, and they're talking about Mathias and how he has like this personality disorder. You know, genetic disease aside, he also just is a weird person and has some kind of personality disorder. And so the court will therefore go easy on him, they suspect, because of this. And so this person that is talking to Harry says, "The more aged I become, the more I tend to view that evil is evil, mental illness or no. We're all more or less disposed to evil actions, but our disposition cannot exonerate us. For heaven's sake, we're all sick with personality disorders, and it's our actions that define how sick we are." And I totally agree with this. Like, even if someone can't totally control themselves, or if they have, you know, something going on weird and they're not normal, still, if they're like a danger to society, that doesn't mean we should be more lenient on them. And if anything, maybe we should be even more strict with people like that because, you know, they make it seem like it's something they can't control in a way. So that's almost even more dangerous. But anyway, so yeah, so I agree with that. But yeah, so in the book and movie, all the women were women who had been unfaithful to their husbands, except in the book, all of them had their children. They were all alive. Whereas in the movie, like some of them had abortions, so that was like a thing. But yeah, in the book, they all had their kids. And so one of the more suspenseful scenes in the book is when Harry finally realizes that Mathias is the Snowman. He only had to accuse Vetlesen, Philip Becker, Arve Stop, Katrine Bratt. He only had to accuse all of these people before finally realizing that it was Mathias all along. But it's a great scene because then he calls, because Mathias is dating Raquel, his ex-girlfriend. And in the book, we learn how, you know, Mathias did this very strategically because he wanted to play this cat and mouse game with Harry. And so, you know, he got into Harry's personal life by dating Harry's ex-girlfriend. Anyway, so Harry calls Raquel and he's like, "Lock the door and all the windows." And so she does that and she's looking out the window and then she hears something behind her and she looks and she sees that water is dripping from the ceiling. And so she goes upstairs and she sees a snowman has been built in like one of the bedrooms. And yeah, that whole scene was just very suspenseful, so it was very well written. Anyway, before, you know, going upstairs with Raquel, Mathias is down in the basement. So she locked the house, but Mathias was inside anyway. And so he's in the basement and Oleg, her son, goes in the basement to lock the door and Mathias is there. And so he, you know, binds his wrists and puts him in a freezer. However, Oleg has his ice skates in the freezer. He's able to cut his binds and he like makes an air hole or something. Harry shows up and he saves Oleg, gets him out of the freezer. And then he goes up to see Raquel and Mathias had like rigged this thing so that if Harry opened the door, Raquel would die. However, Harry can see this, and basically he's able to save Raquel, and she doesn't die, and he just loses a finger in the process. After he saves Raquel and Oleg, he knows that Mathias is up at the ski jump and that he is going to jump because that's what he told Harry he would do. And so Harry goes up there and they have their showdown, and he stops Mathias from killing himself. In the movie, like the showdown scene, Mathias had taped Raquel and Oleg's mouths, and then he had Harry there, and he asked Harry questions, and if Harry didn't answer it right, then Raquel got closer and closer to being killed. However, eventually Harry starts getting the questions right, and so Raquel isn't killed. And this is obviously reflective of Harry's childhood because the guy who we thought it was his uncle would kind of do something similar. But anyway, long story short, Harry saves Raquel and Oleg, once again losing a finger in the process. And then he goes outside and he has, you know, his final discussion with Mathias. And Mathias ends up, like the ice cracks or something, and Mathias falls through and he drowns in the ice, which is obviously very different because in the book, Harry did not want Mathias to die because that was the easy way out for him. So book versus movie. I don't plan on ever reading another book by Jo Nesbo because, yeah, like his writing style and the story just wasn't up my alley. However, I can see why some people did enjoy it. But yeah, obviously I have my complaints, which I talked about earlier. But the book, you know, it did have its good merits. It's just, for me, the negative outweighed the positive. And people who have read all of the Harry Hole books might say like, well, you can't be judging the book that harshly because you haven't read the others prior that lead up to the Snowman. And you could be right. I'm sure reading the other books help you give more of a background on Harry and his experiences. But it wasn't, I don't know, like there were just specific things to the way the story was written that I did not like. And I don't think having read the previous books would make me change my mind on that. And yeah, like I said, the style just wasn't for me. However, plenty of people like it. And so, maybe this has piqued your interest for the book and you could still read it and enjoy it, even if you do know the ending. There's a fair amount I didn't talk about. So you could still read the book and learn new things. But yeah, and even if I didn't love the book, it was still better than the movie, which just had pacing issues and plot holes and different things that just weren't tied up in the end, and so it just felt disjointed. But yeah, so the book wins, even though I personally didn't love the book. However, if you have read the book and you enjoyed it, I would love to hear your thoughts. You can comment down below, especially if you've read other books in the Harry Hole series. Maybe you can convince me to try to read another one. Yeah, I guess that wraps it up on the Snowman. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and join me next week for Cold Mountain, which is a critically acclaimed book and movie. It's kind of a love story in some ways, I suppose, which, yeah, the love story aspect is why I'm covering it for February, since it is Valentine's month. But yeah, that's a really good one. I loved Cold Mountain, so I have more positive things to say in that episode. But yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe and comment your thoughts, and rate my podcast on Spotify, and also rate and review on Apple Podcasts. I would love to get a review. It's been so long since I've gotten a written review on there. When I get some more, I will read them and share them on the episode. But yeah, I haven't gotten a new one in a little while, so I'd really love getting a new review on there. But yeah, thanks again for listening. And if there was something with the book or a movie that I didn't bring up and that you're curious about, you can ask more questions about the details down below in the comments on the YouTube channel. And yeah, we can have a conversation about this. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.